Good evening. Well, famous prison escapes. I think of George Blake getting out of prison in London and finishing up in the Soviet Union, for whom, of course, he'd worked. Ronnie Biggs, famously getting out over the wall at Wandsworth using a rope ladder and finishing up on a beach in Brazil for many years. And maybe this Khalife escape, maybe it'll go down in history as one of those. What have we learnt today? Well, we've learnt that there was strapping underneath the delivery van. So clearly, this guy was not working. Daniel Khalife was not working on his own. That, I think, is pretty clear. And there is the most gigantic manhunt going on. In fact, the M20 this morning heading south in Kent was virtually closed for several hours. But I think what we're going to do this evening with my guests, who know more about this subject than I do, is talk about the state of our prisons, what they've actually come to. And perhaps that gives us an explanation for why this escape has happened. Is this yet another symptom of broken Britain? Please give me your thoughts. Farage@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined by Danny Shaw, crime and policing commentator and, of course, former BBC Home Affairs editor, and Mark Johnson, former prisoner and founder of the young offenders charity User Voice. Danny, we were talking before the show about another famous prisoner escape back in the 1990s.
Yes, there were two prison escapes in the 1990s, actually, and they led to a massive increase in security in prisons. One of them was in 1991 when two IRA prisoners escaped from Brixton. They managed to get guns, they held a prison officer hostage, and they made their way out of the prison and then to the Republic of Ireland. And then in 1994, 6 prisoners escaped from Whitemoor, which was quite a new prison, meant to be a kind of maximum security jail. Yeah. They got out. Michael Howard was the Home Secretary at the time. Huge question marks over him and his handling of it and so on. And actually, since then, prison escapes have become something of a rarity. So we shouldn't jump on this and say, oh, this is a trend in terms of prison escapes.
It's not.
It's not.
No.
But what it does show, I think, Nigel, is some wider underlying issues in prisons that could damage security and compromise security.
Now, this chap was an army officer.
Ex-army officer.
Ex-army officer. Suspected, now we hear, of being a spy for Iran. And yet, I've never heard of this bloke. I mean, was it because of the Official Secrets Act that we didn't know much about this guy and who he perhaps was?
I don't think that's the reason. He did appear in court. There was, I think, some reporting when he was charged with offences under the Official Secrets Act and also terrorism offences as well. But he wasn't sort of, I would say, necessarily a top-grade terrorism story in terms of, news values and so on. Something that's interesting, and certainly when it comes to trial, if it comes to trial in November, I'm sure there would have been, a lot of reporting around it then when more details can emerge. But I don't think it was reported at the time that he was accused allegedly of gathering information for Iran. It was an enemy state, but Iran wasn't actually revealed at that moment.
No, I mean, an ex-army officer, potentially a spy for Iran, would have been a very major news story.
Yes, absolutely. And that, I think, that whole dimension to it raises further questions as to why he was in Wandsworth prison, which is a Category B prison. Now, Category B is the second tier of security.
So you would have thought he'd been in Belmarsh then, wouldn't you?
Would have thought he'd be in a Category A prison, someone accused of terrorism offences under the Official Secrets Act. I'm really surprised that he wasn't. There was a risk assessment carried out, apparently, according to the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, and clearly the review that's now looking at, was that risk assessment thoroughly done? Was it properly done? Did it take all the factors into account? Because if that assessment, came up short, as it appears now, that he should have been in a high security prison, that's a very serious failing.
Keir Starmer making a political point, but quite a fair one, I think, that there have been 10 Justice Secretaries in almost as many years, and that, what any ministry needs is a degree of stability. Danny Shaw, how would you assess the state of our prisons at this moment in time?
Oh, I think they're in a parlous state, Nigel, and it's really gone under the radar. Unless there's a prison riot or a murder in prison or an escape, we don't really get interested in prisons. We try and think of them as sort of...
fair point.
They're over there, they're locked up. We don't really care if the conditions aren't very good, if there aren't enough staff. But, until sort of security is compromised and someone's on the loose who shouldn't be, now suddenly people are getting interested, and they should be. because the population is going up and up and up, and people might say, well, that's fine, I don't mind the prison population going up, but there aren't enough spaces for prisoners and there aren't enough staff. One stat for you, the prison population is about 1,500 higher now than it was in 2010, but the number of staff is down by 5,000 since then overall.
Strong stuff. Mark Johnson, the state of HMP Wandsworth. What is the situation, to your knowledge, in that prison?
Well, you've got a prison that was built in 1851 for 950 prisoners that's currently housing 1,600 prisoners.
Wow.
Over half are unemployed, and the rest are locked up for over 22 hours a day. So you've got quite a dismal figure, and the worrying thing about the whole of this response is we're polarised onto this escapee. There's been sort of, 5 since 2017.
Which is almost nothing, really.
It's almost nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's serious, but it's almost nothing compared to police custody in court, abscondees, etc.
Yeah.
What the bigger figure is, like, you've got 7,000 people that are getting 7,000 recalls for this year, 2/3 of which are for sort of not turning up to appointments, etc., in probation. So that's clogging up this whole, sort of prison numbers, unnecessarily so. And what this is going to do is respond to more security and more regime, more restricted regimes, when actually not really addressing the problem of how do we stop people committing the offences on release.
Yeah, no, sure. And I know you're doing a lot of work in that, and vital work in that area. So we have a prison that is hugely overpopulated, old, some say not in a particularly clean situation either.
It's disgusting,
Disgusting.
Yeah.
We've got reductions in the number of prison officers, the point that Danny makes. And I had Anne Widdecombe on the show last night, and Anne, who was a minister with responsibility for prison, saying how on earth could this have happened in a prison? But you begin to understand how it might have happened, don't you?
Absolutely. Since 2012, they decimated the staffing numbers, they decimated the regime. That's across prison and probation. And it's like this revolving door that's occurring now. London is something like the probation service is 130% over capacity. They're not seeing quite dangerous and volatile people. So what we've turned prisons into is literally warehouses.
Yeah. In the last hour, the Metropolitan Police have released a picture of the delivery van that was used for the escape, and there it is. And you can see the name of the commercial company on the side. There's 150 officers working on this. It wasn't a small delivery van, was it? My goodness gracious me. No, Mark, it's interesting. Danny, the point you made, I think it's a fair one, actually. We don't talk about prisons ever. I mean, people like Mark are campaigning full-time on them and trying to prevent reoffending, and good for him. But you're right. The national debate, we never talk about prisons unless something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Do you think, if the prisons are you used the word parlous, and we talked about disgusting conditions in prisons, do you think this is something that might become a political issue ahead of the next general election, or will it just disappear again?
I think it depends a little bit on whether this guy's caught, because Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, said he will be caught. He was very confident about that.
How can he be that confident?
Well, unless he's got some inside information, or I don't know. I mean, the chances are he will be caught. But if he isn't, that is going to be something that will come back and haunt him. Particularly if there are further problems in prisons at the moment. Because it's not just the loss of staff, it's the loss of experience. Because that you cannot replace. OK, you could get numbers, but those years of experience, that jailcraft, the understanding of when something's not quite right, when someone's looking a bit shifty or a bit unsettled, that kind of thing comes with experience. You cannot just get someone in, train them up for a couple of weeks and put them in and expect them to learn that, because they can't. And the prisoners are very good at taking advantage of that.
Well, we'll see. I mean, Peter Blexley, the former Met cop, says, no, he's out of the country already. And if the Iranians were involved, who knows? He might have been taken off to a private plane somewhere. I mean, we don't know. It's all speculation. What we do know, Mark Johnson, is that our prisons are in a terrible state. There's awful morale within the prison service, huge turnover, up to 1 in 7 resigning every year. The point you were making earlier, Danny, about the lack of experience. How do we get, Mark Johnson, a broader conversation about prisons, prisoners?
I think we need, the public really to demand it from the political environment. For the last 20 years since I've been working in this space, it's been short duration politics that has taken like a veneer of being tough on crime and, and rehabilitation revolution and, all of these little inventions. We need to stop that. We need to stop politicians using it as like a political football, sorry. And until we do, we're always going to keep having the same. I mean, the figures around the increase in deaths in custody, there's 315 people that have died, 88 are suicides.
Over what time frame?
This last year.
Good Lord.
So 60,000 self-harm incidents for both men and women, 2,000 self-harm incidents in women's prison. These are the figures. We had yesterday a German court refusing to sell an Albanian drug dealer back because they're really aware of these conditions.
Yeah, well, gentlemen, thank you, both of you, for joining me on. And it is, as both of our guests have pointed out, it is a very important subject. It's been highlighted by this escape. But folks at home, my guess is, between now and the general election, I don't think much will happen. I suspect the noise may well die down, especially if this guy is caught.